Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. This is not a full frontline update, but a Bakhmut update, Solidar update. This is the third time I'm trying to record this. This will be two parts of video. Made a mess. Sorry about that. Hope I don't repeat myself. Anyway, what's been going on? Well, if we look just to the north of Solidar, the Russians are pushing north to Roslivka and Vesele. However, there are defenses that the Ukrainians have built up around there, so that could be a difficult nut for them to crack. But who knows? There's a lot of troops active in Bakhmut area for the Russians at the moment. VDV, airborne troops are there, as well as regular Russian troops, LPR, and indeed the Wagner mercenaries. Here is the road behind Solidar, which is an important logistical road, but actually just as important is this railway line that I think will act as the new defensive line for the Ukrainians. That is where the Ukrainians will no doubt fall back in evacuating or getting out of Solidar. The very sort of northwestern outskirts of Solidar are still in Ukrainian control, including this sort of rail station, the Sil or Sol railway station up there. Just going to mention this. There's a video that was going around yesterday about an M113 APC just doing a medivac, driving into a place in Solidar, heavy sort of war zone around it, scooting in to a building and then getting an injured person scooting out and saying, that is a decent bit of evacuation of an injured person. That was actually here. I've geolocated that myself. I'm pretty sure it's this building. It's just in front of this aggregate sort of pit there. That would have been from 2 to 3 days ago. Plus, so that isn't something that's happened in the middle of Solidar. As you can see from my map, that central bit, the cauldron that was surrounded by the Russians, is now fully, or at least I've got it fully under Russian control, and an element of the northwestern part of Solidar, the outskirts near the railway line that goes up there, under Russian control. If we look at what No Reports has to say about what's been going on, Ukrainian forces remain in Solidar, controlling parts. I would say the very northwestern part. In northwestern Solidar, Russian recon forces were spotted. It is unclear if they managed to grab a foothold or are being pushed back. Defmon says the AFU repulsed attacks around Spirina, Rozdolivka, Vesele, and Bakhmut. The situation in Solidar is still unclear, but I think it's unlikely Russian forces control about it. It's likely that they control about 75% of it. Some say 75%, as in Defmon here. Some say 80%. Some say 100%. So we shall see. This is what Defmon's claims are. So he appears to have Ukrainians still in control of a large part, the central part, while the Russians have come up into this little part that I was indicating there. You've got the railway line coming up here and the road behind it. So it seems that Defmon has Ukraine controlling some elements of Solidar here. I would dispute that, contest that based on most of the sources, although it has to be said that a lot of the mapping that's coming out is pro-Russian. A lot of the information is pro-Russian, so it is difficult to try and get a handle on exactly what's going on. Take Reba, for example. The Battle of Solidar is nearing its end. Yevgeny Prigozhin announced that the city was fully liberated. He says at least 500 Ukrainian fighters were eliminated during the assaults. Wagner units are clearing the network of underground passages in the mines of Solidar. Ukrainian formations retreating from the town took up defenses in Blahodatne Sol Station and Razdolivka Vesele. Russian VDV, so those are the airborne troops, are attacking Krasna Hora and Paraskovivka from Pidorodny. And this is to say that Pidorodny, just down here, apparently has been captured by the Russians. I did say that yesterday, but even people like Defmon now are saying that, yeah, it looks likely that's the case. They'll be pushing on towards Yahidne up to Paraskovivka and trying to attack through Krasna Hora. Now, there are some entrenchments here that I indicated yesterday, one here and one here. It looks like the one on the right, the one to the east has been captured by the Russians, at least according to Syriac maps and other mappers, that this one is still under the control of the Ukrainians. That's quite a prominent one there. And they are attacking towards these lines. The VDV, airborne troop. I mean, the idea is there any coincidence that the Russians have done particularly well in at the same time that there are reinforcements from VDV, wrong color. Let's try and be sensible here, guys. So at the same time that the VDV are becoming active and helping this pincer movement, so they've done that down the south. The Wagner have come in from the north and pushed through the center. Now we've also got mobilized troops from Russia, and we are due to get a lot more, obviously, or the Russians are. Is it any coincidence that, given a doubling of the troops in this area, including VDV, that Wagner have suddenly had some success? No, it's not a coincidence. It will be very much as a result of that, determined by these factors, which is a case of throwing troops at a problem. So there are huge amounts of losses that have been recorded here on both sides. Now, the Russians are obviously giving their narrative of 500 people dying, and that is being touted a lot by different sources. But we've also seen um, that there are huge numbers of Russians dying, and lots of video footage. I showed you, well, I didn't show you the video, but an entire unit of 13 of them taken out by artillery. And there's claims today, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, of a cruise missile taking out 100 people in Solidar. So using a Tochka cruise missile to take out an accumulation of Russian troops, that's a really big hit and probably a sensible use of a cruise missile. However, there is evidence to suggest that there have been a lot of Ukrainian losses as well. I've seen footage of Ukrainian soldiers collected up into sort of a pile of dead bodies, basically. And here, the source says Russian Wagner mercenaries have executed and looted helmets, vests, and shoes. Ukrainian soldiers, probably in Soledar. I've seen some of this footage, and the bodies have been looted of all their good stuff. That's not unusual in war. You will take equipment, obviously you will, including off bodies of people. It's just, you also wonder whether, taking the helmets, taking the boots is a sign that the Russians just don't have as good equipment as the Ukrainians, something I've been saying for a long time. And now we're seeing that the bodies are being stripped of all decent stuff. There is also been report over the last few days of Russians dressed as Ukrainians, causing havoc. That's been a claim in Solidar. There's also some pretty horrific footage out of, I think, the forest south of Kremna, showing a Russian guy running up on a foxhole with two Ukrainians and saying, surrender. They said, they didn't surrender, and they say, well, we're friendlies, and they have a tussle over the gun. Now, the only thing that really explains that is if the Russian guy was actually wearing Ukrainian uniform and a Ukrainian band, such that the Ukrainians thought, we're friendlies, and then the guy ends up shooting them in the face, and it is absolutely horrible. But one of the claims around that is that this is evidence that the Russians are, and that's a war crime, are using Ukrainian uniform and bands, and trying to fool the Ukrainians. We saw that there was a Russian soldier in Ukrainian uniform yesterday in one of the pictures in Solidar. So that was confirmed in Solidar. So that's possibly happening. But what I'm trying to say is that there will be horrendous losses on both sides. It's just that the Russians will almost certainly have lost a hell of a lot more, despite what their narrative says. It's just the nature of attacking, and um, the fact that they appear to be throwing waves of convicts in first, and then they're expendable, then dying, and then the well-trained Wagner guys come up after the weakness has been found and exploit that weakness. So they are using troops in a way that they are completely expendable. And yeah, it's going to be a horrible scene. What will the stories and footage that will come out of Solidar, I'm sure, will be pretty horrific. But it's all going to be about whether the Russians culminate now, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Kenneth Gregg has stuff to say about that, which is to say that, yeah, you might take Solidar, you might even take Bakhmut after maybe 3 more weeks, but then are you going to have the troops, the capacity, the capability to take Kramatorsk, Slavyansk, Seversk? Do you, all these communities behind here? Do you have the ammunition? Do you have the support of the combined arms offensive? Or is this a case of you are exhausting yourself on this huge victory for you of Solidar and possibly Bakhmut, and after that you have nothing left in the tank? So even if, and I know the pro-Russians will say, "Oh, you're spinning this as positively as you can." No, seriously, like, yeah, I suppose it is a positive spin in a sense, but actually, I really do believe that if the Russians succeed in Bakhmut, they will have nothing but at most more mobilized soldiers to throw at these other areas, which will have time to really defend themselves. And you can bet your bottom dollar that no number of mobilized troops will, well, at some point there is a tipping point, but the kind of mobilization that Russia are going to do is not going to unlock these settlements. They need some kind of game changer. They need equipment and they need a lot of ammunition, etc., etc. And I don't think they have that. Anyway, let's go on to the second part of the video that I pre-recorded. If I repeat myself, I do apologize. Yeah, that's the way it is. Let's go. So Wagner have made these claims about 500 people being killed, 500 Ukrainians. Yevgeny Prigozhin is persistent, though, saying they can now control all of Soledar. Peaceful citizens were withdrawn, he says. The Ukrainian units that did not surrender were destroyed. About 500 people were killed. The whole city is littered with the corpses of Ukrainian servicemen. Of course, that's what he says. Take that with a pinch of salt, but I imagine it probably was pretty costly for the Ukrainians, but also remember, costly for the Russians as well. In fact, even more so. The recent videos show that a significant number of Ukrainian troops were killed in the center of Solidar, while others finally surrendered, says Syriac Maps, pro-Russian source, and leaning into Prigozhin's claims there. And then claims later, Russian army and DPR continue advancing in Solidar and reach the outskirts of Dvorichia suburb and salt mine number 7. Meanwhile, troops began the assault over the Ukrainian defenses north of Krasna Hora, which would allow them to take the town completely. So this is the idea that if they can take Krasna Hora, then they would sort of cut off the Ukrainians from the south and be able to take the whole of Solidar. That's what's going on there. Ukrainian soldier in Solidar told CNN that he and his comrades remained in the town, but the situation was, quote, very difficult, and the next 24 hours or so would be crucial. Yes, we're hanging in there, he said, though practically on our own without commanders. This is a really interesting article, actually, and the most interesting part is this at the end. So he said the next 24 hours would be very difficult. During these days, everything will be determined for the city because we are being trapped. They want to encircle us, he said. The soldier said that if the nearby Ukrainian units held their ground, his unit would be able to safely retreat. He said that the Russians were jamming Ukrainian communications, making coordination extremely difficult. Quote, it is not clear who our neighbors are. So what he means by that is not clear who's fighting over there. I know that some of our guys are over there, but I don't know who they are, right? We have no connection with them, the soldier said. So their radio signals are being jammed. Apparently, they can use mobile phone signals, but mobile phones can be tracked. So they're not using mobile phones because then that reveals their location. So it's really difficult. There's a really effective electronic warfare going on that's jamming communications, and without communications, you can imagine you are in serious trouble. So that might go some way to explaining what happened here to some degree. If the Ukrainians failed to have any comms between each other, then it would have been a bit of a nightmare trying to work out what's going on while you're being sort of swarmed by waves of convicts and Wagner troops. Really difficult situation to find yourself in. Rebar. So actually, let's go further south. This is something else that's happened in Soledar, apparently. So Ukrainian military says a strike has killed over 100 soldiers in Solidar. More than 100 Russian soldiers were killed in the Battle of Solidar after Ukrainian forces launched a missile at a grouping of troops, the commander of Ukrainian Special Operations Forces said. This is interesting. This is apparently a ballistic missile. And actually, probably quite a sensible use, because if they can't for some reason get HIMARS to the area, and they know that there's definitely, they've got drone footage of a real accumulation of Russian troops, artillery might not be able to do enough damage. You need something big to take out that entire building or something like that. I don't know what the details are, but I can imagine that being quite a sensible option for the Ukrainians to take. Throw in a ballistic missile, in the hope that it's got good CEP. Not sure of the Tochka, to be honest, but yeah, interesting if true. This is just, Solidar, Bakhmut, anywhere in the front line of Ukraine. Hundreds of craters from mines and shells along the Ukrainian positions in fields on the outskirts of Bakhmut. There's so much scarring on the face of Ukraine that I don't know that any amount of cosmetic surgery is going to cure that. I think, this is an ailment that only time can deal with. and cure eventually. But it's, yeah, the face of Ukraine has been scarred, possibly eternally. Well, that's probably a bit long, when you think about the universe. Kenneth Gregg here, who's I think a Swedish person fighting in Ukraine, although I don't think in Bakhmut. So be careful of that. Are the Russians losing steam? So this is something that I think they are, and ISW think they are culminating. That's how I see the situation now. They have not managed to close a pincer, and they do not have control over Solidar. Yes, they are inside the city, but have no time to secure the area. Uh, we have a front line in the center, and thanks to the mines tunnel network, we can make surprise attacks in the middle of the Russians. In other words, they can't relax anywhere in Solidar. Besides, we're using drones like never before. They are effective. Now, this is the assumption that the Ukrainians are still, I think, in the center here, is what Kenneth Gregg is saying. Now, I don't know whether that's true, whether that's just out of date now, even though it's from this morning. Yeah, difficult. If anyone want, they are effective. So then trying to get sort of support for drones. Even if we are, if we were to give up Solidar, the Russians cannot move forward, and the resources with the resources they have now, they've suffered too many losses to do so. Besides, we now have strong lines between Solidar and Bakhmut. The media writes about how strong and well equipped Wagner is, and almost admires their activity. Let's think for a moment and ask ourselves, what have they actually accomplished during this war? February 2022, failed attempt to break into Kiev. March to August, failure to get anything continuous in Kharkiv and Kharkiv Oblast. September, everything is half finished in Donbass, Mariinka, Bakhmut, and Soledar. Things are started but never completed. On the other hand, Wagner has succeeded in destroying all the communities they have been in, and they have succeeded in killing its own people through mindless tactical missions. We must remember that they are attacking the attacking party, and their maintenance is limping. They spend more material than they get in. I would like to draw parallels with the Battle of Irpin, where they used their material as if they had a well that never runs dry. They fired the last shell and suddenly had to retreat. To attack Solidar as they did now, and at that cost, their steam is gone for a continued advance until they have been replenished. Obviously, that grammatical issues aside, I'm reading what he says. Replenishment takes time, and hopefully we shall have received the new weapons as promised. Many are also asking if we should have retreated earlier from Solidar, as our defense in the city has cost us dearly in fallen soldiers. So here's an admission that yes, the Ukrainians have lost a lot of soldiers. I think we did the right thing in taking the jewels in both Bakhmut and Solidar. We have weakened their forces and thus reduced the risk to Kramatorsk and the communities between Bakhmut and Kramatorsk. Cynically, someone may claim that we got the value for the sacrifices, but war is relentless. This is so important to understanding what's going on here, right? If you are taking this as what the Ukrainians are intending in general, Bakhmut has been the intention was to fix Russian forces so they'll be exhausted, so that even if they do take Bakhmut, they will be unable to move on to take Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, and possibly even Siversk, and all the communities in between. This is exactly what I've been saying over the last week. Right? It doesn't really matter too much operationally whether Bakhmut goes, is captured by the Russians. I don't think they can go anywhere else and do much else. They will have exhausted themselves. Now, this is super important what he goes on to say. What I cannot understand is that more than 500 civilians, including children, have decided to stay in Solidar. 90% of them are pro Russian, and they have been waiting for their liberators. If the town now falls totally into the hands of the Russians, the realities are these: the men will be forcibly recruited and the children sent into foster homes in Russia. That's what awaits them, but what else can you expect from the totally brainwashed? Massively important that and interesting that there are still that many people remaining in Solidar and that they are predominantly pro-Russian. So there's still, I mean, this is an area, Donbass, there still is pro-Russian sentiment, and you can imagine the last people to remain there before the Russians took over would be the ones who had sentiments of for the Kremlin. This is war translated from the Arestovich daily statements, who's a spokesperson for Ukraine. It's highly doubtful that Russia would find enough new Wagner cannon fodder in Russian prisons to take another town in this manner. So this is building on what Kenneth Gregg just said. The Russian Even if Russian troops take Solidar, making a big propaganda show about it, the occupation of the rest of the Donetsk region would mean taking another 20 towns the size of Bakhmut. Russia will try to overemphasize the capture of this town, with Prigozhin and Denis Pushilin making propagandistic statements claiming that the whole town is already occupied by Russian forces. Uh, and interesting to see what they see as, or what Arestовich sees as the composition of the troops. The Russian troops are composed of Luhansk mobilized troops, a third, Russian troops, regular Russian and VDV, a third, and Wagner troops, a third, including the Wagner recruited prisoners that are used as cannon fodder and human shields. So that is an interesting take on what's going on. It's also of the opinion that there is culmination. What I have to watch out for in this area is still Lancet drones being used. Here's a Crab, which is a self-propelled gun, being taken out by Lancet. 2 Lancets were needed to take it out in the end, and the ammunition then cooks off, I think. As Trentelenko says, the need for short-range air defense to eliminate overhead drone surveillance and the need to have vehicle-active anti-missile or anti-drone point defense is underlined in this tweet. Absolutely. So Lancers are still a problem and causing issues for the for the Ukrainian ability to do counter battery fire, to support their troops. You know, the Lancers are a thorn in their side. Anyway, that's the situation there in Soledar. Really quickly to go down to the rest of Bakhmut. So this is a nice image to give you a sense of what's going on. The colors just allow you a really clear visual representation. Soledar and Warmapper here agrees with Syriac maps at that part of Soledar. So when I was talking about this part being captured by the Russians, so really they are in a very small part of Soledar. Actually, Warmapper agrees with that. That's the Russian advances yesterday. Pidorodny, they haven't got Pidorodny fully taken, but most other people accept that Pidorodny is now in Russian hands, which then gives them the ability to attack northwest to Paraskivka and north to Krasna Hora, and then completely cut off the logistics, but then also gives them the ability to take out this road to the northwest as well. They haven't got Maximienko Street taken, but there are attempted advance through the industrial district here, and they are talking about, Opitny, marginal gains there. This is what ISW said, marginal gains in Opitny. And there is this chap here who gives a video. He talks about how they are on the Patrice Lumumba Street, the Russians, and they're advancing. They're doing well in the industrial area, and how that they have purchase on Maximienko Street. So he would actually argue, if he can be believed, that that the Russians are down this road here, and they are, fighting hard to make advances in the east. So lastly, I'm going to go back to Defamon to talk about what's going on just down south of, sorry, I'm flipping around too much here, Bakhmut. So here we have Patrice Lumumba Street there. The Russians are moving westwards. We have no real news about exactly what's happened around Maximienko Street. No news about whether the Ukrainians still hold the waste sorting plant there. Opitny, I would probably draw the line maybe around here now. I think there's been marginal gains in Opitny. And then we come on to Klishchivka, what's happening there. And we're going to talk a little bit about the entrenchments behind there on higher ground. So back to Defmon, who says, even if both sides have a heavy losses in the Bakhmut area, the Russians are wasting an enormous amount of combat potential in this area. They claim they are using Wagner prisoners, but I'm fairly certain they also use VDV. Absolutely, airborne troops are being used. Culmination is almost certainly what's going to happen, at least for some time. A Russian MOD declared that they captured Pidorodny. I believe this is technically true. I don't think Ukraine tried to hold it, but instead are holding the heights north and south of it. The village itself is not a good position to hold. So Pidorodny is here. There's higher ground north and south. So just to take you back to my map, sorry, I thought he was going to say Klishchivka there. So Pidorodny's there, north and south of the village there, and there is where the Ukrainians are going to, he's arguing, are going to hold out rather than in the village, which is on lower ground, and the Russians appear to have control over Pidorodny. Let's go back to Klishchivka. Sorry about that. As we come down, Bakhmut south, the Ukrainians repulse attacks around Klishchivka and Mayorsk. Klishchivka is a door to stop south of Bakhmut, similar to Soledar in the north. Russia needs to take it and the fortified heights west of it in order to actually do a serious attempt at Bakhmut. As you can see, the fortified area west of Klishchivka, top of the image, is most likely more important than the village. This is a Google image from 2018, so I'm not revealing any secrets. Considering it was built over 5 years ago, it's probably very well sort of fortified. And this is what I've talked to you about. There's a trench network going on around here. You can see all the trenches. I've shown you this on Google Images before. This is behind. You can see the raised ground. Google Images has tried to make that appear, as raised as it is. And down in the valley, you've got, or down in lower ground, you've got the town itself. So even if the Ukrainians lose the town as a whole, or lose a lot of the town, the Russians still got a difficult time at taking this fortified ground behind it, which is this area behind. As I've shown you before, here is the trench networks there, and you will have, and again, that's 4 years out of date, so you will have, much greater fortifications having been built there. So I think that will be difficult, and that will give them at least the Ukrainians some ability to defend some of this line between Klishchivka and Bakhmut, because that's a worry. If the Russians can get to even Ivska, then really Bakhmut is beginning to look quite surrounded, at least from three sides, in a way that will be very difficult for the Ukrainians to get supplies in and out. So that is Bakhmut, really. And that's I would have separated this into a separate video, I think, because it demands its own video. But thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. And I will probably be unable to do a Ukraine War extra video today due to going to a funeral, but I might be able to. It just depends. Anyway, thanks so much for your support. You take care, and I'll speak to you soon.